welcome to And.Fake.Action, the movie podcast with Phil and Dustin. I'm Dustin.
And I'm Phil.
How's it going, Phil?
It's going very well. How are you, sir?
I am very well indeed. As I mentioned, this is a movie podcast where Phil and I, both avid movie lovers for a long time, and good friends for a long time. We're going to talk about on and off. Nice, fair enough. But we're going to talk about movies. We are going to pick a different movie every episode. It might be a movie that we like. It might be a movie that we don't like. Those
might be a movie one of us likes and the other one doesn't.
So yeah, if you like movies and you like hearing people talk about movies, then you've come to the right place. Now, before we get started, I do want to preface that in the movies that we talk about, there will be spoilers. There will be lots of spoilers. We will talk about the movie frontwards and back, inside and out. So if you haven't seen the movie and you're worried about spoilers, go watch the movie first and then come back and listen to us. Sound good? Sounds good.
I never understood why people would want to listen to a podcast or read anything in depth about a film before seeing the movie.
But it's just a fair warning. This isn't like a review of the movie where you don't give things away. This is a full discussion about the movie. So yeah, we're going to give it all away. So know that before going into it. Phil, I think you have a note that you would like to also share.
Yes, in addition to the spoilers, I do want to give fair warning that there might be some profanity in this episode. There's a lot of profanity in this film, which is rated R. And this episode of our podcast, you should just have a language warning. Okay. Today we're talking about the 1988 action comedy film Midnight Run, directed by Martin Brest, starring Robert De Niro, Charles Grodin, and various other folks. A nice variety of other folks.
It is a nice variety.
Yes.
So yes, a variety of folks. That's how they're listed on IMDb.
And then, are we just? What's that? Is that it? Are we starting?
That's it. That's the whole episode. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Come back next week when we talk about Airhead.
No, I think if we're still recording, we're going right into the film now. So Dusty, tell me a little bit about your experiences with Midnight Run. Now, when did you see this for the first time?
I saw the movie for the first time shortly after it came out. As I mentioned in the last episode, my dad is a big movie lover, always took us to the movies. So if a big movie came out, or even a lot of little movies came out, we went and saw it. And so that summer, I do remember seeing that one in the theater. And I remember enjoying it a lot. It was very funny. And I saw it a number of times after the fact. We recorded it off of cable, I believe, and I had it on VHS. And it's one of those that I would get out on occasion and pop it in and watch it because I enjoyed the performances with Charles Grodin in particular. But everybody in the movie is really good. But then I hadn't seen it in, probably 25 years plus, probably. Very long time. And then this past year, Charles Grodin passed away. And then that, I think, brought it back to the forefront. And when we were talking about movies to record, this is one of those that kind of popped up. I think it popped up in particular because of that. So that's my experience from it. And I really enjoyed watching it this last time. And it was very entertaining. It holds up pretty well. I think the only thing that maybe doesn't hold up as well is, and this is just true for a lot of movies that of a certain time, there's no cell phones and people are using payphones a lot. And nobody uses payphones anymore. I don't even know where they exist anymore. But outside of that, I think it does very well for itself. What's your experience, Phil?
Well, it's similar. I did not see it at the theater when it came out. My first experiences with it were on cable. In 1988, I was not going to the theater to see a lot of rated R movies quite yet. That started, I know you and I are the same age, but for me, that started, maybe a year or two later. I know I'd seen rated R movies at home before that, but as far as going to the theater to see them a lot, no. But so when it began to be run on cable a lot, and that's kind of when it started to catch my eye. Like you, Charles Grodin's performance pulled me in and was very funny. I'm a fan of that type of humor. We'll get into that. And it was fascinating to see Robert De Niro in a comedy like this. At that time, I'm sure I had seen him in a couple of his bigger films, with Martin Scorsese and some of the things he was famous for and winning Oscars for and whatever, But but I'd never seen him in this. I think because it was his definitely first comedy, the most comedic film he had been in up to this point, and that was fascinating to see him in that. Oh, he can be funny, or he can contribute to that humorous atmosphere,
Yeah.
So I like that a lot, and again, like you too, after that sort of initial run on cable kind of played out, I guess the first couple of years, and I moved on, I never really did revisit it again until just this past year. It had always been one I had always wanted to see again, and so I'm happy to finally do that and see it again now.
It was a lot of fun. And for me, from my experiences with Robert De Niro, I don't think it was the first Robert De Niro performance that I had seen, but I had never seen it at that point. I had never seen Godfather 2. I had not seen Deer Hunter. I've not seen Taxi Driver. I had not seen any of those, iconic performances. I saw Untouchables that came out the year before.
Yep.
And he played Al Capone. So I kind of knew him from that, but
Very
I really
small
didn't.
Part.
Yeah, it was a little more than a cameo. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I hadn't really seen him in much. So my first experiences with him was in that movie. And so as years went by and I saw him in other things, and I finally got to appreciate the fact that he was definitely more known for his dramatic chops than he was for his comedy, that I was like, oh, well, it took him a while to get to this, and and he's really good at it. And then later on in his career, I mean, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, dipped his toes, head, really into more broad comedy. But I think that, honestly, for me and my money, the comedy that he does in Midnight Run is definitely more suited to him, the persona that is Robert De Niro.
Right. And the movie that jumps to my mind, and the forefront of that, of course, is Meet the Parents. That's the big, I think, that I can think of, that I have seen, although I've seen it once. It's been a very long time. That was his comedic sort of,
And a little bit before that, though, there was Analyze This.
Oh, right. Analyze This,
that's right. Billy Crystal, and then, of course, the sequel to that.
The first thing I want to do, and I'm going to do this before I forget, is I want to come back to something you said earlier about how well it holds up, and you talked about how everybody's using the payphones in this film, and that was an aspect of it that didn't hold up so well. I want to hear a little bit more about what you mean by that, because
it dates the movie for me.
Oh, it dates the movie. Yeah, of course, it dates the movie, but the film still.
No, the film itself. I mean, the structure of the film, the quality of the film, everything else about the film, I think holds up. I guess what I meant by that is there's some movies that I can watch and they become time frame agnostic, so to speak. It doesn't make a difference if I think that it was taking place in the year that it was made, or if I think it was taking place today. There's not a whole lot that makes me peg it to a certain time. Fashions aren't particularly stapled to a certain time frame. Obviously cars are a certain way, but in some movies where they really lean on technologies of the time, then it dates it in a certain way. And that's not to say that the quality of the movie and the entertainment value of the movie isn't there. It's just, it makes me realize, oh yeah, this is from a different time. This isn't from today. This isn't even from, 10, 15 years ago. This is, 30 plus years ago.
Right.
So yeah, it's not a knock on the movie in any way. At least I did not intend it to be that way. When I watch some of the movies that came out during my lifetime, during my movie awareness lifetime, I think of them differently than I do think of movies that came out in maybe the 70s or the 60s or 50s and 40s. They're obviously dated, but that's okay because I didn't know them until after they were dated. A movie like this, I knew it at a certain point, and then later in my life I came back to it, so it's like I knew it before it was dated, and now I see it and I'm like, oh, there's aspects of it that are dated. So it's kind of a strange gymnastics act my brain has to do. And I don't know if other people have the same thing or if it's just me. And actually, in one respect, I'll be honest with you, I actually like it better because it adds challenges, because cell phones make things easy, like almost too easy. They eliminate challenges for the characters in movies because you can look up anything that you want. You can call anybody that you want.
Cell phones would make a lot of movies.
They would change so much.
It makes you almost wonder, how do they make movies today? So what is this movie about? Let's kind of set this up, what this is about, and kind of go from there.
It's about, I don't know, about 2 hours.
Yep.
It's about Robert De Niro's character, a gentleman named Jack Walsh. He is a former police officer. He's a current bounty hunter, skip tracer. He works for a bail bondsman. And he is given the job of tracking down a notorious bail jumper by the name of Jonathan the Duke Mardukas, played by Charles Grodin. Now, his character, he was an accountant, and he stole money from a mobster, and he gave it to charity. And then he was arrested, and he skipped bail, and he's hiding out. And so the bail bondsman is going to lose everything that he put up for this guy. And so he needs to have this guy brought back by a certain time on a certain day, or he's going to lose all of his money. And that's when he hires Jack Walsh to pay him $100,000 to go get him and bring him back in like 5 days. And that pretty much sets us off. Now it's up to Jack Walsh, has to find him, bring him back across the country from New York to LA, and chaos ensues.
So we've got a deadline, which is good. So that keeps the audience, in suspense. And we've got a road movie. So we've got a destination from one to the other. We've got a little bit of a buddy movie.
Oh, yeah.
Road movies and buddy movies often go hand in hand.
An unwilling buddy movie.
Right.
And of course, there's the other antagonists left and right. There's antagonists on both sides. There's the mobsters that are trying to get at Mardukas. There's the FBI that are trying to get at Mardukas. And there are other bounty hunters that are trying to get to Mardukas. So there's all these other obstacles that are impeding the progress. It's never simple. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be jump on a plane, go pick the guy up, and then fly home. Obviously, it can't be that way, because why would we watch? I think that the obstacles that they put in front of these guys, and it's not just the other people. Jonathan Mardukas is a huge obstacle to the success of what Jack Walsh is trying to accomplish in very, very funny ways.
Well, right. He doesn't want to be brought in and sent back to jail, because if he is back in jail, it'll be very easy for the gangsters who want him dead to get him and kill him.
Which would be bad.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the Duke and this situation. So he was arrested for this embezzlement, and because he robbed money from this guy who was a gangster, but he, worked for his accounting firm, and he robbed it from whatever legitimate companies this gangster has set up, I guess, and committed
whatever
a crime
companies that they're like laundering money through, more than likely.
Could you maybe help some of the listeners out there, and I'll admit it, me a little bit, and tell me how exactly the process of the bail bondsman works?
Well, what happens is when you're arrested and you're booked, and the judge basically decides whether or not you're allowed to go free or you have to stay in jail, they will set bail. And, if the bail is like $1 million, you might be able to post like 10% of that. It depends. It varies from state to state, county to county. And if you don't have it yourself, you can go to a bail bondsman, and they will put that money up for you to get you out of jail, and then you have to pay them.
Got it.
And then some. So the bail bondsman is basically a savings and loan of a sort, that they're going to give you the money that you need on the promise that you are going to show up when you're supposed to, so that they're going to get their money back, and then you're going to pay them on top of that money.
Mardukas gets bailed out, but then he skips bail.
Yep.
And goes into hiding because he doesn't want to go back to jail.
That is correct.
So if he doesn't get back into jail at a certain time, the bail bondsman will not get paid back by the Duke.
In this case, he'll be out $400,000. Yeah.
And then he will go out of business because
he's not going to be able to pay any of his debts. Because he's out of his money. Because chances are, in order to put up that money, he had to take that money from somewhere else.
Right. So the Duke has skipped bail, and now he's in hiding, and now no one can find him. And the bail bondsman needs to hire somebody to go find him, go get him. And there are bounty hunters. There are people out there whose specialty it is to find these people and essentially kidnap them and bring them in.
Yeah.
And
it's legal.
Yes, it is. Which is I think I was watching one of the special features on the Blu-ray where the writer of the film, George Gallo, was talking. I think it was his interview, and he talked about that process. It's a very weird thing because this person, you're essentially kidnapping somebody and bringing them in, and there's some obscure law from the 1800s that makes it legal.
Yeah.
So,
but it's not like anybody can just do it. I mean, you have to be licensed.
A licensed bounty hunter.
I believe so.
Okay.
And it varies from state to state. So, and honestly, I don't know if it's how that affects jurisdictions, in the real world. But yes, if you're licensed, you can basically apprehend somebody. Phil uses the word kidnap. But basically, yeah, you take them into custody and then you drag them where they're supposed to be or where they agreed to be. It's not something that's happened to me personally. Probably never will.
Well, you just got to mind your P's and Q's.
So far, so good.
Okay, so thank you very much. And our listeners, thank you very much if there were any that didn't quite understand how all that process works.
And there's a good chance I got all of that wrong. So talk to a legal representative if you're actually in trouble.
It was interesting that I was watching some of the special features too when Robert De Niro was preparing for this role, and he's the type of actor who comes from more than method school would do this. He hung out with bounty hunters, before the shoot to learn about them and learn how they lived and learn how the job works and stuff. And John Ashton at one point did so too, hung out with them.
Now, who's John Ashton? Tell the
John
people.
Ashton plays a rival bounty hunter who, because of the difficulty that Jack Walsh is having in bringing the Duke back into custody, the same bail bondsman hires the rival bounty hunter, whose name is
Marvin Dorfler,
which is a wonderful name, And Marvin Dorfler ends up being hired also to chase down the Duke.
I love the scene later in the movie after the Duke has encountered Marvin like one time, but here comes Marvin and Charles Grodin just goes, "Is that Marvin?" And he just says it's like so casually, like they're old friends. I loved it.
Yep, there's a lot of little moments like that. Well, as long as we're on the subject of John Ashton, I guess we can talk a bit about him. And he's a familiar face, I think. And
you might be more familiar with him as Taggart
in Beverly Hills Cop.
Beverly Hills Cop, yes.
Yep.
And he was fantastic in that movie. Yeah. And he did not do the third Beverly Hills Cop movie, which was a good choice. Smart choice. I don't know if it was his choice, but I'd like to think that it was, because that was a turd.
And John Ashton was talking about how in Beverly Hills Cop, the parts of Taggart and Rosewood were actually much smaller. But as they were shooting, and that film was also directed by Martin Brest, who directed Midnight Run, that the director would allow them to ad-lib a little bit and capture some of that stuff on camera. And, things ended up working, and they kind of made those parts bigger parts. John Ashton tells a great story in his interview. He wanted the part. He was kind of surprised that he had to audition for it. I guess Robert De Niro wanted to read with everybody, I guess before they were officially brought on or whatever. So a lot of actors came in to read for this part of Dorfler, and John Ashton comes in, and they introduce each other to Bob De Niro. And everyone kind of leaves the room for a second, and it's just him and Bob De Niro in the room together.
Phil's over here saying Bob De Niro.
They call him Bob and whatever. And Robert De Niro reaches over to hand something over to John Ashton, but he drops it on the floor before John Ashton could take it. And then Robert De Niro just stares at him, and John Ashton just stares back at him and says, "F*** you." Robert De Niro says, "F*** you back." John Ashton says, "F*** you back," and they say to go back. And John Ashton kind of thinks that's John Ashton's theory is he got the part, and they got along great after that. And his theory is that all the other actors that went in there, when Robert De Niro dropped something in front of him, they probably just bent down and picked up. "Oh, here you go. So you dropped something here." And that, of course, as you see which as all you are listening who have seen the film are familiar with the rapport in the film that those two characters have, and that, of course, explains it all.
Yeah. I really enjoyed John Ashton in this movie. When I watched it again, he was a more significant part and stood out even more now than I think when I first saw it.
I learned that in the earlier drafts of the script, his character was supposed to be killed.
Oh, really?
Yep. And I don't remember, somebody said, well, we think that Marvin, maybe they'd seen the dailies or whatever, and somebody said, well, we think Marvin Dorfler is too lovable, too likable to be killed. You'll lose the audience if you do that. So they had to come up with something else to do, and they came up with the solution of having him bust in on the climax and almost screw everything up and whatever.
That makes sense, because honestly, I had forgotten whether or not he lived or died, and half of me was expecting him to, and then when he didn't, I was like, okay, good. It would have changed the tone of the movie, because the movie is, it's an action and there's drama in it, but it's at its heart, it's still a comedy, and I think it really would have taken it down in not a helpful way.
What that discussion reminds me of a little bit is the experience I remember you telling me about when you saw The Big Lebowski. And Steve Buscemi's character dies in the end. Spoiler, Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
Steve Buscemi's character dies. And then you did not like that. Didn't bother me so much, but I can see where you're coming from. Maybe for similar, like if this would be similar if Dorfler had died, you might not.
It may not have had the same impact of when I first saw The Big Lebowski. The death of Steve Buscemi's character in that movie it just sort of seemed so out of left field when I first saw it that I'm surprising. Like, I didn't understand like the dramatic purpose of it, other than just to do it. And then there was the funny gag with the ashes in the face. But when I saw it, it was years before I saw that movie again. But then when I saw it again, and I knew it was coming, obviously it didn't bother me as much. But I didn't really like The Big Lebowski that much the first time I saw it. I run real hot and cold with the Coen brothers. Mm-hmm. A lot of people love the Coen brothers, and I love certain Coen brothers movies, but other ones I'm real hot and cold on. But then when I saw it again, and I know that's not the movie we're supposed to be talking about, but when I saw it again, might have been 20 years later, I really enjoyed it.
That's okay to talk about different movies. We kind of expect to do that a lot as we go through these different actors. But that's one that none of the actors in this film are. So, but that's okay. That's okay. My favorite running gag, the one that I noticed with John Ashton, was I counted 3 times where Robert De Niro tells John Ashton, "Hey, look out!" to look at him to look over his shoulder, and then he clocks him and
punches him right in the face. Yeah,
he falls for it every time.
As far as running gags go, that's a good one. But there was one that I really. One of the characters we haven't talked about really yet, and that I want to mention, is the lead FBI agent that is on the trail of both Jack Walsh and the Duke, and played by wonderful actor Yaphet Kotto. I guess my first experience with him was the movie Alien, and I've seen a few other things. I used to watch the show Homicide: Life on the Street, and he was on that show. But anyway, he is an FBI agent. He's Agent Alonzo Mosley, and you'll hear that name a lot throughout that movie. That's a running gag. People constantly, identifying themselves as Agent Alonzo Mosley because Jack Walsh steals his ID at some point. Through the process of this movie, Agent Alonzo Mosley is getting more and more frustrated with his people's inability to apprehend these people at various points along the journey from New York to LA. And at many of these stops, they think that they're going to have their opportunity to apprehend them. So at like one of the earliest stops, it's like at a bus stop. And there's a bunch of police cars there and FBI vehicles. And then the shit hits the fan and Jack and the Duke get away. And then later on, they think they're going to get him again. I think it's at a train station. Or do I have these flipped? There's another point where now they're there, and now there's even more police cars, even more FBI cars. And then that doesn't work out. And then later on, there's another point where there's even more FBI cars. And it's like each time there's more and more FBI cars.
Helicopter.
And there's a helicopter. And so each time they think that they're getting closer, as they're getting further and further across the country, the number of vehicles that are showing up, and then ultimately there's a big chase scene with just dozens of government vehicles flipping over and crashing as they're driving through the desert. And I just thought that was hilarious. I was really paying attention. I'm like, each time I'm like, my God, there's more cars. Holy crap, there's more cars. There's more cars even still. And I thought that was quite a lovely touch.
Yaphet Kotto, there's a audio interview with him on the Blu-ray, and he kind of talks about that too, how that's a running gag.
I didn't listen to the interview.
You picked up on it.
I noticed it all on my very own.
You know what? You did, and I didn't notice it. It seemed like a natural progression of the film. You know, I think it got more and more intense, and built up more and more of a climax as we go.
Just built to such an absurd level. I loved it.
My first experience with Yaphet Kotto, I probably saw Live and Let Die first before I saw the first Alien. One of Yaphet Kotto's good observations in his interview, he was talking about this type of film is the type of film, if a lot of people would read the script, you might not know it was a comedy. And it's written pretty straight, and that a lot of the characters, almost all of them really, you play it straight. You don't play it for laughs. You play it very serious. Obviously, the gangsters, the bail bondsman, you the FBI agent, you're deadly serious, and the funny situations, Yeah.
And this comes back to what I was saying earlier, and like the difference between this movie, which is a comedy, and Analyze This, which is a comedy. In one, you're playing it very straight, and then the other one, you're playing more of a caricature of characters you've played in the past. I mean, I don't think there's a lot in this movie outside of the leeway given, for example, like Jack Walsh, literally he steals, FBI car. He steals the ID of an FBI agent. I mean, it wouldn't.
Right.
He would go to jail for this, in the real world.
One of the great comedy bits that I enjoy is when the FBI when Mosley is on the plane early on. So there's not many FBI agents with him at this point because we're early in the film. But there's two of them that follow him around pretty closely throughout the film. And when Mosley discovers that Jack Walsh was using his name, and the FBI agent behind him says, "Well, it looks like Jack Walsh must have obtained your identification, sir." And then Yaphet Kotto just slowly turns around and looks at him like, "You dumbass, obviously." That's what.
Yaphet Kotto had so many slow burn reactions to his little underlings that were around him when they would come into his office, and he'd be like, "Am I going to want to hear this?" And there was always there was the one guy, I think it might have been the same guy, who he would always deliver the obvious news. And even the other underling would look at him like, "Really, man?
Oh.
Come on."
I don't remember which was which. There was one who was a little bit older and was very balding, and another that was younger and had a little bit more brown hair. And I want to mention him because the younger actor who had the fuller head of brown hair, his name is Tom Irwin, and I recognize him from one show. He plays Claire Danes' character's father in the show My So-Called Life, which I saw a couple years ago.
I've never seen an episode of that show.
I think it's a really good show. At the time when it was on, I kind of wrote it off. And sometimes when shows or movies come at you when you're the same age and they're trying to talk and communicate to you and reach out to you, you get like this jaded shield, and you're like, I don't want to. That probably doesn't get me right or my life right at all, But then 20 years later, you watch it and you're like, oh, that's pretty good, It's a pretty good show about teenagers and high school drama and stuff like that. Anyway, he got a good role in My So-Called Life, but that's a deep cut.
Very.
As a tangent. There's a couple other actors we're going to talk about for sure.
We got to talk about Joey Pants.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He plays Joe Pantoliano, known to many in the industry as Joey Pants. That was good that you said Pantoliano like that. Very good, because there were a couple of other actors on these interviews on the Blu-ray that did not pronounce his name correctly, and they pronounced it differently whenever they did try to pronounce it. And that's exactly why he goes by Joey Pants.
Right.
I watched an interview with him where he explains why it's Joey Pants, and it says it's exactly that reason, is that people couldn't pronounce it correctly.
It doesn't roll off the tongue.
I've never had a problem with it. I mean, I don't know if I heard it maybe first or I just read it and I'm like, oh, it's Pantoliano. And maybe I'm just good with Italian names. I don't know. But yeah, in the interview, he basically said, just so at some point it just became, I think somebody else just started writing down Pants. And so he just started doing it that way. And so he tells somebody, it's like, yeah, it's Joey Pants, like you wear. So that you wouldn't have to spell it out for him or anything. So,
he was talking in his interview about how, he enjoys being a character actor. And he was actually offered one of the parts of those two gangster.
More on number one, more on number two.
Those two kind of comic relief gangster guys, and he did not want one of those parts.
Yep.
He wanted the bail bondsman.
They had a different characterization in mind for that character, like just like a big, oafish kind of guy for that character in the interview that I saw.
He talked in his interview about the audition process and how he was sitting in on the readings when they were auditioning for the part of Jerry. Jerry is one of the, I guess Jerry is, what's his name? Moscone. Eddie, the bail bondsman, is Joe Pantoliano. Right. His assistant in the office, or his coworker in the office, is Jerry.
Oh, right.
And he was talking about how when he was sitting on the readings for auditioning for that part, and a lot of the actors came in and were awestruck over like Bob De Niro, and they lost their character and they fell out of character and they lost their cool and they didn't get the part. He doesn't go on to talk about the actor who actually got the part of Jerry, whose name is Jack Kehoe. But I'm just going to hypothesize here that Jack Kehoe would have come in and he would have been totally fine earning that part. Because Jack Kehoe is actually a guy I kind of remember seeing in a lot of 70s in smaller parts of about this size in a lot of 70s movies. He's one of the other detectives in Jack Nicholson's detective office in Chinatown. He was in Serpico. I guess I don't remember him in The Untouchables, but he was in The Untouchables. I know he had a part in The Sting. So here was a guy, he was a face that I always kind of recognized in these smaller parts in a lot of those movies I was watching. My point is, I enjoyed seeing him in this movie, and I can imagine him having no trouble getting in the part, because here's a guy who was in movies with Paul Newman and Robert Redford and Jack Nicholson and Robert De Niro already. So,
I felt that everybody was very well cast in this. But Dennis Farina, playing the main antagonist, Jimmy Serrano, is a guy who came to acting late in life. He was in the Army. Then he was a police officer for 18 years in Chicago before he was, I guess he was introduced to Michael Mann, film director and creator of Miami Vice and some other shows and Crime Story maybe. And so he was introduced to him, and when he was making the movie Thief with James Caan, and he was offered a role,
which is very good. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it. I need to see that movie, especially. I really like James Caan, or Jimmy Caan, if you know him like I do. Jimmy and Bobby.
I'm gonna call when we talk more about Charles Grodin, which TikTok, but I'm gonna call him Chuck the whole time. If I can do that.
Sounds good. Anyway, so he came to it late. I mean, he'd had a full career by the time he actually became an actor, and he's always entertained me. I love his Chicago accent. I mean, he's passed away now, R.I.P. But I've always loved his Chicago voice, his fast talking. He was great in Get Shorty? I think he was one of the rival mobsters in Get Shorty. He's played a number of
That's
cops.
one I haven't seen since it came out.
Yeah, me neither. But anyway, I thought he was really great in that role. He was very, very, very funny. One of his early lines is this more on number one?
Oh,
Put
yeah.
on more on number two. And
that's it's the menu. That's on the Blu-ray.
Oh, is it really?
The intro.
That's hilarious. The main antagonist, Jimmy Serrano, a originally Chicago-based mobster that the character of Jack Walsh has experience with. And basically, he's the guy who runs Jack Walsh out of Chicago, where Jack Walsh was a police officer. And Jack wouldn't play ball. He wouldn't take the payoff. So he was given a choice, basically, get out of town or we're going to kill your family. And so to save his family.
He struggled over that choice for quite some time.
Yeah. It was a couple of years. It was touch and go, but no. Yeah, then he leaves Chicago, and we're going to come back to that in a minute because there's some things to talk about there. But so now Dennis Farina's character, Serrano, he is, he's a big mob boss. He's mostly out of Vegas at this point. So, I mean, just right off the bat, okay, this character, he's a scumbag. He's drug pusher. He's a mob boss. but he's funny. I mean, they make the character funny because at its heart, again, this movie, it's a comedy.
Well, here's one of I think the tricks that they pull off. To me, that obviously, I mean, he's a gangster and he's playing it straight. He's playing it serious. That's how the movie works. You have to believe there's real stakes. He's a real gangster. That's a real badass, and he's really going to kill the Duke, you know. But what makes him funny on some undercurrent level is some of the lines that he delivers, even though he delivers them very straight. The lines he delivers are, if you don't come through, I'm going to come over there and stab you through the heart with a pencil, or I'm going to bury this telephone in your head, right? And it's like, that makes it funny. Maybe not laugh out loud funny, but that makes it takes the edge off the seriousness.
And it's the casual way in which he does it. It's like he's not like screaming and shouting and raging. He's just like, if you don't do this the right way, I'm going to come over there and stab you in the chest with a pencil. It's like he's just almost matter of fact about it. It's like, this is what I'm going to do. Now, because we just talked about that, I want to mention Charles Grodin's character is constantly kind of needling Jack, just talking to him, trying to get him to open up, saying, why did you get run out of Chicago? Why this? Why that? Because every now and then Jack he'll drop a little nugget of information. Mardukas picks it up, and so he just sort of like tries to ply him a bit and try to get him to open up for whatever reason. And
we should talk about what those reasons might be. I've only just now sort of thought about it. I think we all enjoy Charles Grodin's performance and the deadpan humor and the sort of needling him. Are you eating healthy? You should go visit your family. You should know. If I were your accountant, I would advise you not to open a restaurant. Is he passing the time? Is he trying to needle him? Is he trying to get information out of him? Do something to loosen him up so maybe he can give him the slip later? Like what is he doing? Or is that that's just who he is?
I think honestly, I think it's probably some of all of that. I think initially he's saying what he's saying because he's trying to do whatever he can to trip up this process of getting him back to LA. Yeah, that's when he lies about being afraid of flying. But then he's with this guy, and I think that he's just genuinely, he's like, I'm not a bad guy. And that's the thing. He's a criminal. And maybe this is something we should have talked about a little while ago, that Jack Walsh was a former cop. He's got a moral code. He does this job because it's something that he can still do to apprehend criminals. So they skip bail, he goes and gets them, and he brings them back in because they're scumbag criminals. He may not have a badge anymore, but this is something he can still do.
And he's in this job, and he doesn't have a badge anymore because he didn't want to be a criminal, basically, by being a corrupt cop.
He didn't want to subvert his moral code by doing that, and so that's how much he took his morality seriously. He basically abandoned his wife and his daughter. He had such a grasp on his moral code that he chose that, okay, well, I can't do this, so I have to extricate myself at personal expense, the expense of family, and the expense to himself because of those morals. And Mardukas did a similar thing. He had a firm grasp on his own moral code, which led him to taking this money from a criminal and then giving it to charity at the expense of his career, his potentially going to prison, his potentially being killed. So both of these guys had this very strong moral code that led them to do what they did. And both of those instances in their lives had destructive consequences. So when Jack is trying to go get Mardukas, he has a hard time seeing that this criminal can also be a good guy, that he did what he did for good reasons. And I think that throughout, when you have Charles Grodin's character saying, hey, you should eat better, hey, I wouldn't recommend that you do that, it's showing that this is a nice guy, this is a good guy, he actually cares about people. He wasn't just out to take money and just go be rich someplace. He did it because he had a strong moral code. And I think throughout the movie, Jack Walsh, Robert De Niro's character, really begins to understand that. And especially towards the end, when he ultimately lets him go. He's like, I get it.
Absolutely. I think it's that moral code. I think they both learn about each other as the movie goes. So as they learn more, they like each other more. And of course, the glue that kind of, I think, cements that is when they learn that they have the same common sort of bad guy. Charles Grodin stole money from Jimmy Serrano. Jimmy Serrano is the guy who I mean,
Ran him out of
got
Chicago.
Jack Walsh run out of town. I mean, if I was Jack Walsh, he's really pissed at Jimmy Serrano. Was he going to do turn in the Duke to take him back to jail so Jimmy Serrano can kill him? At some point in Jack Walsh's head, I'm sure he makes the decision that he knows he's not going to do that. And he does make that decision, obviously.
Yeah, but they're both still very stubborn people. They're very dialed in to what they think is right. And, of course, so that just leads to a lot of headbutting. But I think through the process of Chuck's character, needling him and trying to get him to open up, that partially leads them, and just necessity leads the character of Jack Walsh to having to go see his ex-wife and his daughter, who he hasn't seen in 9 years. And that scene, he shows up, basically, he needs money. They're broke, they're on the run, and he doesn't really have a choice. And so he shows up, and she's not truly psyched to see him because she knows that when her current husband comes home, things probably aren't going to go well. And he obviously doesn't want to be there, and so they're butting heads, and Charles Grodin's trying to calm them down. And then the daughter shows up, pops in, and just the look on Robert De Niro's face, what I saw was just the shame of having left and having basically no contact for 9 years was just painted all over his face. The level of awkwardness, it was just so real, it was palpable. Nobody really knows what to do in that situation, and I thought they did a beautiful job of playing that out in a very kind of a real way. And it wasn't saccharine. It wasn't, oh, it's a sweet reunion. It was awkward. It hurt, and you can see the pain on everybody's face.
Yes, that's a tough scene, and that's a scene of that type in a lot of movies might not often work. It might often feel like a little bit of a clunky scene, and in this one, it really works. They're able to pull that off and make it work. But it's one that kind of the movie kind of stops, for a moment there to have that scene and teetering on that edge of is this going to work, or is this going to be sentimental or stupid or whatever, but it works.
It lets us see, I think, more of why Jack Walsh is so angry. He's more angry, I think. He directs a lot of the anger outward, but I think he has a lot of anger at himself that he wouldn't admit to, but you can't avoid in situations like that.
Right. He's pissed because he probably liked being a cop and couldn't be a cop there anymore, and he's pissed that he couldn't, because of that. Whoever's choices they were, his family could not stay together as a result of that. So how do we feel about Robert De Niro's performance overall?
I can't think of another actor to play that part. I think that a lot of other actors would maybe be a little hammy at it. I think he stayed just this side of hammy. I think he played it straight, but with enough comedy. There's the line where Charles Grodin says, you're a grown man, Jack. You're in charge of your own words. And he says, yeah, well, I've got 2 words for you. Shut the f*** up. I mean, but I liked the line. I'm like, well, that's 4 words, but
one of my favorite bits is now back to the phone booth. Mm-hmm. That dates the film. One of my favorite bits is when Robert De Niro's on the phone. He's talking to Joey Pants, but he's talking about how if I don't bring him in, I'm gonna kill him and blow his brains out or something. And he turns to
and he goes,
no, I'm not gonna do that. Don't worry, Duke. I'm not gonna.
Yeah,
that's a great. And I really enjoyed how he was flying first class, and I sort of was thinking about it and picking up on it. So I was watching the scene where he first gets the Duke, he brings him on the airplane before the Duke does his freak out. They're flying first class, and Jack Walsh really is enjoying flying first class. He probably does not fly first class very often at all, if ever. He's not overplaying it at all. Like you say, he's not hamming it up. He's not, it took me that kind of second time to watch that scene to really kind of get how he's really enjoying, like,
He's just excited to be
here,
there.
let's order this steak. Give me a glass of your finest champagne. He's got a big payday coming in his mind, and he's enjoying flying first class. It's funny the way he played that.
Yeah.
Without going, overboard with it.
I read some stuff about other possibilities for the Duke role. I don't know that I heard about anybody else for the Jack Walsh role. I think it was pretty much going to be Robert De Niro if he liked the script, because he was looking for something different, something with comedy in it. But I heard some other possibilities.
Oh, I wanted to mention, if I can cut just for one
go ahead.
real quick. I wanted to mention that Yaphet Kotto said something similar, because he, after having been an Alien and a couple other things, like action type, Running Man, and all the scripts he would get were action movies and cops and stuff like that, And so when he got this, that was a comedy. Even though when you read it, you might not know it's a comedy, but he knew it was a comedy.
Right.
He grabbed the opportunity to play that role.
But I was going to say that there was some other possibilities, people that they were looking at for the Mardukas role, and I don't know that they would have worked. Like, one was Robin Williams. Robin Williams has turned in a number of great performances in his career, but I think his style of comedy would have been maybe more broad.
Yeah.
Than this movie is tailored. So I think that was probably good that didn't happen. I also read something about possibly like Bruce Willis, which just I don't know. I think he would have been too similar to the Jack Walsh character to maybe work. I think Charles Grodin looks like he could be an accountant. I can buy that.
Oh, sure.
And he's so good at the dry comedy. I can't think of anybody else who would. The movie was very well cast, I think, top to bottom. Even featuring a very small part, a favorite character actor of mine by the name of Tracy Walter.
Oh, yeah, of course. Tracy, I saw he's in towards the end. And
he's in the diner.
I didn't write him down, so I'm glad you remembered that.
I'll be
Tracy
honest,
Walter,
I think it's probably one of the most normal roles he ever played.
He's wearing a great shirt.
His voice was
normal. So if you listeners want to go back and see what I'm talking about, if you forgot what shirt Tracy Walter's wearing, check it out. It's a fun shirt. I have an eye for shirts.
I have fond memories of him. I remember him first. There was a short-lived sitcom. I think it was called Best of the West. I'm going to have to look it up real quick. But
Sounds familiar.
That's what it was called.
Like, that rings a very faint bell.
And it featured the dad from Silver Spoons, Joel Higgins.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the characters was played by Tracy Walter, and his character's name was Frog. This show came out in 1981. My sister and I, to this day, we see him in a movie, we say, Frog.
I feel like this episode will be the one where we know if the listeners like this or not, I like it. Lots of the good tangents. Go on.
A lot of this can be edited out. I feel like that's what Phil is saying.
No, I shouldn't have said anything.
No, it's just he's one of those characters. My sister and I both, we knew him from that show. I haven't seen that show since 1981. I don't know how many. It looks like it went 22 episodes. I don't know if all 22 aired, but we knew him from that show, and so whenever we'd see him in anything else, I mean, he was one of the henchmen in Batman.
Yeah,
he was the cook in City Slickers. I mean, he's had a long and varied career of playing these kind of greasy, slimy characters for the most part. He'll forever and ever, to me, be Frog. Back to the point. Tell me what you feel about Chuck's performance.
He's great, Mr. Grodin. Passed away recently. My first experience with him, I think, was this movie. And I was like, whoa, this is funny. I've always been drawn towards that deadpan, dry delivery, that type of humor. I think of people like Bob Newhart. To a certain extent, Albert Brooks. But Albert Brooks has a different edge to him, too. I'm sure there's some other names we can come up with. But Charles Grodin. And I was, when I look at Charles Grodin's filmography, I'm surprised. Maybe I don't know if I should use the word ashamed even. I haven't seen that much of these films he's been in as far as other experiences I've had with his work. Of course, he was in the Beethoven movies, which I never saw. I remember him. If anyone out there is a fan of Rosemary's Baby, I'm sure you remember he has a nice small part in Rosemary's Baby. He's a much younger man. So Charles Grodin in this film, Midnight Run, by the way, was about 52 when it was shot. He's a very young, good-looking 52 years old. Robert De Niro was about 44. So that's an interesting. You think they're kind of about the same age. Well, what are your experiences with Charles Grodin?
I'd seen him in a couple of movies. Like I'd seen like the movie Seems Like Old Times with Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn. I'd seen him. For some reason, I watched the movie The Woman in Red probably way more times than that movie actually deserves to actually be seen. Charles Grodin was also in another movie called Last Resort, which also featured John Ashton, Marvin. But yeah, I'd seen him in a few things. Obviously, The Great Muppet Caper. He's the villain in that movie. So, I mean, I'd seen him in a number of things. The Incredible Shrinking Woman. So, yeah, I knew more about Charles Grodin than I did about Robert De Niro at that point in 1988, honestly.
One of my favorite bits, we've already kind of mentioned some of them. You know, there's a bit, and this is one of those bits that features one of the few female characters in the film. So as we go through the film, they start off trying to go on a plane. Well, then they can't fly. Then they try to get on a train. Then they end up off the train. Then they try to get a bus. So they go buy bus tickets. And they go to the bus ticket lady who's selling the bus tickets. And his credit card has been canceled because Marvin Dorfler arranged for his credit card to be canceled. So Jack Walsh, for whatever reason, he tries to pull out his FBI badge to get a bus ticket somehow or whatever, however that was. And he flubs the name and he starts to introduce himself as Alonzo Mosley, but he probably already said his name was Jack Walsh, so he flubs the whole thing. But you watch Charles Grodin's face during that whole scene. He's standing next to him in his trench coat, and he's got his handcuffs on with his jacket on. And you watch Charles Grodin's face during that whole scene, and he is kind of looking at the bus ticket lady, like kind of giving little subtle shakes to his head and little eye movements, communicating to the bus lady that Jack Walsh is full of shit or whatever it is, you know, and the bus ticket lady's not buying it. There's a different name on that card, sir. And would you like to pay cash, sir? And then he does. And at one point, Charles Grodin's looking at the bus ticket lady and even gives her a little wink. That's hilarious.
Well, I just want to say this about the two characters of Jack Walsh and Jonathan the Duke Mardukas. They're alike in ways that neither one of them would probably acknowledge, and that's that they're both kind of con men. In a way, you know, as pertains for Jack Walsh to his job, he kind of has to be that way. You know, he calls people up, pretends that he's somebody else. He's pretending that he's somebody else throughout this whole trip from New York to L.A., you know, saying he's Alonzo Mosley. And then the Duke, he embezzled, he stole, he gave the money away and all that. But then you get the sense of how much he can be a con man, with how much he manipulates Jack Walsh by lying about not being able to fly or having other phobias and so on and so forth. But then we get to a scene that was largely improvised, at least in the rehearsals, and that's when Charles Grodin gets his opportunity to pass himself off as Agent Alonzo Mosley, FBI, and so they can get some money. And there's that scene where in specific,
the counterfeit bills.
The counterfeit bills. Are you doing the litmus configuration? Yeah. The litmus. You're doing the litmus configuration. As Robert De Niro is like pretending to like use a pencil on a $20 bill and see which ones are real and which one is fake, and then
another little part that was improvised. I was learning about was I guess there was a scene where they're at a point where they really don't like each other. You know, because the Duke just tried to get on the freight train and shut the door on Jack and kick him off the train, and Jack gets on the train. But I guess the next scene after that, when you see them, they're kind of friendly with each other again. So they had to come up with some way to kind of get Jack to like him again a little bit or something. So they're sitting around I don't know if they have a little fire going in the freight train car or what, but they're sitting in the freight car. Charles Grodin came up, this was an ad-lib, came up with the line of, "Have you had sex with animals? There's some chickens in that farm back there that were looking pretty good." And that cracks Jack Walsh up. And so that was interesting to learn about that and how much of these scenes were ad-libbed and how they played off each other.
that the direction that he was given was do whatever you can do to make Robert De Niro laugh.
Oh.
That was his direction.
Okay.
To make him laugh, and he got the job done apparently.
So a lot of times in these and when there's a comedy duo on screen, there's one considered the funny man and the other is considered the straight man.
Mm-hmm.
Do these two fit in that mold exactly traditionally? Is one the funny man and one the straight man? Because if there was a straight man, that might be Jack Walsh, but does that make Charles Grodin the funny man? Because he's so dry and deadpan, is he because he's so straight?
Honestly,
or is it not? Is that dynamic not really at play here?
It may not fully work here, but I would say probably that the Duke is more of the straight man. He's very funny. Often straight men are very funny, but they're funny in a different way. The not straight man one are the one. Look, I'm going to use Abbott and Costello because you've got the one straight man who's funny but keeps it together, and then you've got the funny one who's usually flustered and gets upset or doesn't understand the thing or something, or just gets angry for various reasons. And I think that if you draw parallels here, you're going to draw a parallel to the Duke being more even-keeled. He doesn't ever go off the rails. He's like pretty much even-toned throughout the movie, except for the part where they're being shot out from the helicopter. That's when he really freaks out.
That's
for a moment. But Jack Walsh, he's mad. Like he's constantly flustered. He's either pissed off at the Duke, or he's pissed off at the bail bondsman, or he's pissed off at Marvin, or he's pissed off at the FBI. He's pissed off at somebody the whole time. And he's the one letting the situation get the better of him. That would be my argument.
I was really enjoying the music in this film. How did you feel about the music?
When I was watching
Danny Elfman.
When I was watching the opening credits and I saw Danny Elfman's name, and my jaw dropped open. I went, really?
It's very different from the score to. He did do Batman, right?
He did Batman. He did. He's done a lot of Tim Burton movies, and they have a certain feel to them. This one's more of like a bluesy guitar riff, kind of. That's kind of indicative of like Lethal Weapon or some of those movies from the 80s. When I heard it, I'm like, this doesn't jump off the screen as Danny Elfman. Whereas oftentimes his other bits that I hear, I'm like, yep, I can hear Danny Elfman there.
So this film was successful at the box office. It was a hit, and people liked it. What I learned was that it came out according to George Gallo, he was interviewed. One of the things he said was this movie came out the same day as Die Hard in 1988. Although if you look it up on Wikipedia, they give release dates that are actually 5 days apart, but close enough. George Gallo said he wrote this film, I guess his first time when he was 20 or 21 years old, he wrote this movie. But he talked about how it morphed a lot, as they were shooting and casting. And speaking of casting choices, I guess some producers were thinking of Cher for the part of the Duke.
Oh, I did read about that.
So, we don't really, we've mentioned Martin Brest in passing, but I haven't really said too much about him. I was kind of reading about him. I know him, I probably first was familiar with his name when Scent of a Woman was big, and I think he got a Best Director nomination for that. And I was kind of looking at some of the things that he worked on. He acted in. Is this Martin? Martin Brest was an actor, actually, in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Who is Dr. Miller? So, listeners, dearly, if you like a podcast about people looking up actors on Wikipedia and talking about them, this is the podcast for you. There'll be more in future episodes.
We're still feeling this whole thing out. Bear with us.
Brest directed Going in Style. He directed Beverly Hills Cop, of course. He did not direct Beverly Hills Cop 2.
He was offered it, but he felt like he had done that. He didn't want to repeat himself. He wanted to do something different.
He was an actor, apparently, in Spies Like Us, briefly. Of course, we talked about Scent of a Woman, Meet Joe Black, which I never saw. And Geely, which I never saw, and he has not directed a film since that one. So in filming Geely, the studios took creative control from him, radically rewritten and reshot. Of course, it was one of the biggest bombs of all time, Brest has not directed a film since, but he doesn't. The Wikipedia article does not say a lot more about what happened to him after that. He's alive.
Yeah.
Phil and Dusty's Wikipedia podcast. I'm sorry. So we liked the film Midnight Run.
Yeah, it was all right.
That sounds like our Our take on it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I watched it on Friday night with my mother, who I know for a fact has seen it, but she couldn't remember. So she enjoyed it. For her, it was like watching it for the first time.
Yeah.
And even she thought it was funny, and she was up way past her bedtime.
Oh, nice.
Just so any of our listeners are out there, my mother, who is a senior citizen, she lives with us, and she usually goes to bed around 8:30 or 9. And she was up until after 10 o'clock, which that's huge. That is huge. Did you know that there were 3 made-for-TV movie sequels?
Oh, I wanted to mention that. I stumbled across that, and I was very shocked by that, and I did not look into them very deeply.
They starred
we should talk
Christopher McDonald, who some of you might know better as Shooter McGavin from Adam Sandler's Golf.
Billy Madison.
No, not Billy Madison.
Happy Gilmore.
Happy Gilmore.
Happy Gilmore.
Some of you would know him as Shooter McGavin from Adam Sandler's
Happy Gilmore.
Happy Gilmore. This was a retake. We still couldn't get that movie.
I think you should leave the whole thing in.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna. Yeah, so some of you would know him from that. My sister would know him as one of the T-Birds from Grease 2.
I always liked Grease 2. Well, when I was a kid, Grease 2 was on cable so much. I saw it so much.
I saw it a lot.
I've barely seen Grease
sister.
1 all the way through. I don't even.
Honestly, for me, I like Grease 2 better. I think it's because Michelle Pfeiffer is still hot.
We will talk about Michelle Pfeiffer movies in future episodes. Please stay tuned.
Oh, yeah, good stuff. Anyway,
I would like to recommend the Midnight Run Blu-ray. It has there's no commentary track, but it does have interviews of pretty good quality interviews for the most part. I think most of the interviews were filmed around the year 2015, relatively recently, so they have some perspective. There's interviews with Robert De Niro, Charles Grodin, Joe Pantoliano, John Ashton, an audio interview with Yaphet Kotto, and with the writer George Gallo.
Welcome to our Phil Reads the Back of the DVD Case podcast.
As I was watching these interviews and kind of going through them, by the time I got to the end of them, I had a really good time. I really feel like I kind of got a lot of insight into the experience and the good time that all these guys had on the film. The last one I watched was John Ashton's interview, and he was tickled pink to be talking about the movie. And he almost even kind of teared up at the end when he was talking about, the experience of working and acting and bringing something to the people and so on and so forth. I make it sound, but it was genuine and it was enjoyable. And I know you said, Dustin, that you watched some material too.
Yeah, I watched some interviews, some promotional interviews, and a couple of background things, and there was some interesting bits of information. The one that I found most surprising was the fact that there's one scene. Well, first of all, when they shot this movie, they shot it all over the country. They shot it in New York, Chicago, even Michigan. They shot, which is
I remember them mentioning Michigan. I don't know.
Arizona,
to know which parts were
Texas and LA.
Michigan. I wrote it down, dude.
But there is one scene that they shot in New Zealand. They went all the way to New Zealand to shoot the scene that takes place in the rapids. Why don't we have rapids here?
They tried to shoot in the rapids here. It was winter, I guess, and it was too cold. In wherever they were.
So they went to the other half of the planet where it was summer.
And it was warmer. Still not the greatest. This was in the Robert De Niro's. I learned a little bit about this from Robert De Niro. Now, Robert De Niro's interview on the Blu-ray is not the best.
He's not great.
He's not a good. No,
he does not enjoy interviews at all.
He doesn't say much. He gives brief, not very elaborating answers to things.
I read a Rolling Stone interview from 1988, and he has one sentence answers for everything.
Let's talk about. Is there anything about this film that doesn't work? The one thing I might want to just get your take on a little bit is at 125 or 27 minutes, is the film a touch on the long side? Do you think, or is it okay?
It didn't really feel that long to me. It felt long to my mom, who was up way past her bedtime.
Yes.
But no, it was fine to me. What about you? Was it long?
No.
Well, I'm glad we talked about it.
But I will say that maybe a touch, but not enough to really make me knock it or bring the movie down a notch or anything like that. as we build towards the more ridiculous car chases towards the end, and the Duke tries to steal the airplane, and there's the rapids,
which honestly
and
happened much earlier than I thought it did.
And
I thought that happened much later in the movie.
It feels like all that sort of stuff feels like a climax, but it is like there's a lot to go after that. Yeah. So, and you stop and you visit the ex-wife and the kid for a while, and all this sort of adds up. I can't think of anything I would want to take out.
It moved for me.
Because it does.
There's no lagging scenes. There's not a lot of just pointless exposition. It moves. There's something happening. And I read that Martin Brest was basically a shell of himself by the end of the movie. Like he was just losing weight throughout the movie because he wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, because this movie was this constant, rumbling train headed towards its destination. And the movie kind of has that sense that it's just barreling along. And so for me, the runtime didn't feel long. It felt pretty brisk overall.
I think so too. Yeah, Yaphet Kotto said they were filming 7 days a week, long hours every day. He did not as a complaint. He enjoyed the experience very much, but he did. It was a grueling production.
Yeah.
And to come back to Robert De Niro too, when he first meets Yaphet Kotto, that's one of the moments where he has to be a little more funny, be a little more play it for gags. He's kind of jibing and needling the FBI agent there. So I don't know what kind of running time we're looking at so far, or if there are any points that we've missed that perhaps you want to talk about, or if any more Wikipedia articles the audience would like to hear.
I got some DVD cases over there we can read through.
Sure.
We can do that. We're going to figure this out at some point, guys. We're new to this, so bear with. At the end of the day, I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was very good, and barring my choice of phrase earlier, it does hold up very well. It's an entertaining movie. It's very funny. It's well paced, I thought. Yeah, it's a good flick. I would recommend it to people who are fans of action comedy, fans of buddy movies, fans of road trip movies. It's
fans of good movies.
Fans of good movies. There you go. That's really the only criteria. Phil, what would you rate this movie, like, out of, let's say, 5 stars? I
used the 5-star rating system, and I think I can give it the solid 4 out of 5.
I think that I can agree with that. Phil just ran away. He's running back.
So thank you very much for joining us this week, or this time on this show.
I hope you've enjoyed our rambling. I had a good time talking about this. We finally got around to doing it.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to doing more of these down the road. Hopefully you guys are enjoying us talking about it, and maybe learn something new if you didn't know anything about the movie.
This was episode number 2. We don't know what we're going to cover in episode number 3, but you never know.
Airheads.
You never know. We may have mentioned it in this episode somewhere.
Airheads.
But we don't know.
No, we don't know. We have to figure that out.
I was just listening to some other podcast where somebody said they loved Airheads. I don't know. Maybe I'll give it another chance.
Takes all kinds.
Right. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and please watch some good movies, and then you can come back and listen to us talk about one of them.
As long as it's one that you've watched. Otherwise, we're going to talk about a different movie. That's just the way it works. But
tell us what you want us to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, when at the time that these are put out, we will attach some sort of method for you to contact us.
As we're recording this, we don't have any of that, but by the time you listen to this in 2024, we'll have all that out there for you.
Yeah, there'll probably be some brand new method, like implant or something. You can just telepathically send us your thoughts. But until then, we'll pick some movies and we'll talk about them. So thanks again for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode of And.Fake.Action, the movie podcast with Phil and Dustin. If you'd like to learn more about our podcast or this episode's movie, consider following us on social media for links, pics, and other fun stuff. All of our @s are in the description for this episode. And as always, thanks for listening. Now go watch some movies.